Gonna start. So for everybody that's signed up, if you registered for the webinar, we're recording this session and it will be available on the atholbirdclub.org website sometime tomorrow. And you will receive an email with this recording link and some other information about tonight's topic. So that will be going out 24 hours from now. So with that said, I want to just introduce my friend, Eric Eaton. When Eric was out at UMass, we've got a chance to spend quite a bit of time in the field together. And I learned a lot, and I was able to teach him a little bit about dragonflies at the same time. So it was a good summer for both of us. So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Eric Eaton, author and good field guy. So here you go, Eric.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation to talk to all of you. When I was there at UMass in 2009, I think I talked to you about this book, the Kaufman Field Guide to Insects of North America, that had just come out, and was maybe the reason I got the brief position there to do some pitfall trap sampling identifications, and so that's how I came to know most of you, most of my friends there in Massachusetts. I'll share my screen now here and get this thing started. So this is my latest book. Well, actually, it's not quite my latest book. I have another one out as well, but Princeton University Press was kind enough to partner with a publisher in the UK that approached me to do this book, and so it's taken off very well since then. By the way, folks, I'm not jaundiced. I just need to invest in better lighting. So no worries there. I'll try not to go over. Sometimes when I do this presentation, I go a little bit over, but I do understand that if you are not completely enthralled, you can get your money back. So that's the room where I'm hearing anyway, in this room I'm sitting in. But I want what I want to do this evening is briefly go over why so many people hate wasps. What is it about them that aggravates us, aside from the fact they can sting? Then we'll go over a ton of reasons to love wasps. I'll give you a few identification clues, how to tell what a wasp is. We'll take a break, do an interactive exercise. I forgot to warn Dave about that, so he may hopefully he can take some of you or all of you off mute so you can chime in, but we'll decide if it's a wasp or not, because so many other insects mimic wasps. And then lastly, we'll talk about how to become a wasp watcher and why you should do that, and what kinds of behaviors you might observe in the course of watching wasps. And lastly, we'll talk about how you can help wasps in this age of insect decline, where basically all kinds of insects are suffering. And my advance is not working. There we go. All right, well, one of the problems that we have with wasps is that our definition of a wasp is too narrow. So the first thing that comes to mind usually when someone says the word wasp is a yellow jacket, or maybe bald-faced hornets, which in actuality are not true hornets. They're another kind of yellow jacket that nests above ground. But these are the wasps that we have the most negative associations with. They're the ones we come in conflict with the most. They nest under the eaves of our houses and other buildings because our architecture mimics the cliff faces and rock ledges and things where they nest anyway. So that's how they interpret our urban environment and our suburban environment is very much the way they interpret the natural world. And then there are the true hornets, also a kind of social wasp, of which we have only one species established so far in North America, and that's the European hornet, Vespa crabro. And then, of course, paper wasps, which typically have smaller colonies. They build these inverted umbrella-like nests of uncovered paper comb. So these are typically the wasps that we see the most often. They're social, they're defensive because they're having to protect large numbers of helpless eggs, larvae, and pupae that can't defend themselves. So they're extra aggressive. And maybe you don't see the nest that's underground until you run the lawnmower over it. So there's lots of opportunities for conflict. Now, some people do recognize other wasps as wasps, for example, mud daubers. And still, though, we often consider their nests unsightly. I think they make architectural masterpieces, but depending on your tastes, you may not think the same. And so these insects also build on our structures and cause some degree of concern, although they're solitary. And so they're too busy nesting to be of consequence to us most of the time. Another reason we don't particularly like wasps is because when we feed other organisms like orioles, for example, with fruit and jam, or we feed ourselves outdoors at barbecues and picnics and things, they come and take what we think is an unfair share of our foodstuffs. But there's a great number of reasons to actually love wasps. First of all, the overwhelming majority of wasps are solitary. They don't live in those big nests that we tend to think of when we think of wasps. They're tiny. The greatest diversity of wasps occurs from 5 millimeters to less than 1 millimeter. Very, very tiny. And as demonstrated by these three examples that I took from those pitfall samples in Massachusetts. So these are very, very tiny wasps, and they can't sting you. In fact, of the wasps that can sting, it's only the females that are able to, because the sting is a weaponized apparatus that used to be the egg-laying organ, the ovipositor, and it's since been turned into a venom injecting apparatus, and the egg comes out of a different orifice now. Wasps are extremely ecologically important, and they provide free pest control in your garden, your yard, and in agricultural settings as well. I want to say a brief word about the fairy flies, the wasp on the far left there. It's said that some of them are so small they could fly through the eye of a needle. These are arguably the smallest insects known to science. Some are barely larger than some one-celled organisms. They're that small. My friend Sloan Tomlinson, who is there in Massachusetts himself, actually, in Western Massachusetts, and he's researching wasps on his own and taking these impeccable photographs of them, and that's his image on the left there. That gives you an idea of how tiny we're talking about, and actually some of those are on the large end of the micro wasp spectrum there. And so consequently, some of these wasps, these solitary wasps, will develop inside the eggs of other insects, like the fairy flies do that for sure, but a lot of other insects do as well. A lot of other wasps do as well, exploiting the eggs of other insects. But there's still more diversity. And believe it or not, there's some wasps that live preferentially indoors. And one of them is are the ensign wasps, and they are named for their abdomens, which are very tiny. They're flattened, and the wasp waves it up and down, kind of like a flag. And so it gets this sometimes they're called hatchet wasps or flag-tailed wasps for that reason. They might be mistaken for ants at first glance, though, because they do a lot more running around than they do flying. And they're predators or parasitoids of cockroach egg cases. So the female ensign wasp will lay her egg in the egg case of a cockroach, and her larva will consume all the eggs within that ootheca. Flat-backed wasps can sting. They're very small, but you will feel it if one stings you. But fortunately, you're not as likely to come in contact with them. But they're parasitoids of things like clothes moths and meal moths and carpet beetles, things that are actually pests themselves. The larvae of these flatback wasps will be parasitoids of the larvae of those pest insects. Well, one reason I love wasps anyway is just their sheer beauty. They can be spectacularly beautiful. Many of them advertise their ability to sting by wearing bright warning colors of black and yellow or red or white or orange. Some of them are brilliantly metallic. Same kind of thing applies there, perhaps, a kind of warning that these things are able to defend themselves. But even wasps that can't sting will resemble wasps that do, to gain protection, of course, by association. Well, among the other reasons to love wasps are the services that they provide to us and to ecosystems, not the least of which is pollination. Now, in truth, wasps are flower visitors. They're there to take flower nectar in almost all cases. Exceptions are the pollen wasps, which are related to yellow jackets, except that they're solitary. And instead of hunting insect prey or insects they can be a parasitoid of, they harvest pollen, and they don't have a pollen basket like bees do, but they ingest pollen and nectar, get back to their mud nests. They have built freestanding mud nests in most cases. Some of them live in burrows, and she regurgitates this pollen and nectar mix as food for her larval offspring that will develop inside the nest. In the Western US, our only genus is Pseudomyceras, and they only pollinate penstemon flowers. And so in the Rocky Mountains and in other parts of the Southwest US in particular, you'll see these wasps visiting flowers. The males have very long antennae, and they will stake out these patches of penstemons and patrol them. And when a female lands on one of the flowers, he'll go and try and mate with her. But wasps pollinate other flowers as well. In fact, some flowers in some orchids in Europe and other places in the world, not in the US as far as I'm aware, have evolved to look like female wasps. And that's to attract the male of the wasp species to attempt to copulate with the flower, during which time the flower puts pollen onto the wasp, hoping it will fall for the same trick again and pollinate another flower. But here, wasps are responsible for pollinating milkweed. Milkweed is not pollinated, I'm sure you know, in the same way that other flowers are, in that there's no free pollen grains floating or adhered to the flower. The pollen is contained in packets, and these packets are very sticky. And when an insect steps on a packet, it clings to the insect, and the insect must be very strong to withdraw that packet and be able to plug it into another milkweed blossom. And not all insects are able to do this. So it takes a large wasp, like a tarantula hawk in this case, to do that, or one of the other larger wasps, like a cicada killer, for example, or large butterflies like monarchs and swallowtails. Well, I did not get to put this in the book because I learned about it after the book was published. But this, we've known for quite some time that ants are responsible for the distribution of seeds of many kinds of plants. Well, it turns out that in some places around the world, wasps do this as well. And so the plant produces an auxiliary protein and fat body either around the seed or attached to it. And this body is called an elaiosome. And because wasps feed their larvae protein and fat, they will glom onto these seeds and transport them back to the nest or transport them away from the plant, cut off the elaiosome, drop the seed, and then fly back with the elaiosome to their nests. And it's so far apparently only the social wasps that do this, but they disperse a good number of plant seeds in this manner. It's called Vespicochori. For ants, it's called Myrmecochori. Well, wasps occupy every level in the food web as well, and including herbivory. So there are wasps called gall wasps. I'm sure I'm telling you nothing new probably at this point, but the female gall wasp inserts an egg into a particular host plant and injects with it, we think anyway, some chemicals that will stimulate the growth of a gall around the egg or eggs that she has inserted in the plant. It's also possible that the feeding activity of her larval offspring also stimulates a gall or does so in lieu of the oviposition activities of the female wasp. But where you all live, there are many different kinds of gall wasps afflicting oaks in particular. That's the case throughout most of the eastern deciduous forest. But gall wasps also affect other plants as well. For example, the mossy rose gall in the center of this slide here is produced by a wasp as well. And the galls look terrible. It looks like a tumor, but it's not a tumor, to quote Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's just a nutrition sink that is built to both feed and protect the wasp larva inside it. It siphons off a little bit of energy, but not enough usually to create a problem for the plant. There are some instances when the gall is associated with a fruit or a seed where this is not the case, and it is very damaging. But for us in North America, gall wasps, not a problem, just a really unique critter. Well, wasps are probably the principal parasitoids of all other insects and arachnids and a couple other kinds of arthropods as well, but particularly insects. And to define a parasitoid, by the way, that is basically a parasite that invariably kills the host. And so here we have a couple of different strategies for parasitoidism. The Ichneumon wasp on the left there, here's a female. She's inserting an egg into a very tiny caterpillar host. If you're like me, you're thinking, well, that's a pretty big wasp. How is she going to get a big offspring out of that tiny caterpillar? And what happens is that the egg and the larva that hatches from it lies in wait inside that caterpillar host, letting it continue feeding and growing. And then when it reaches a critical stage, then the larval wasp inside starts consuming it. And so you do get a large wasp out of a comparably large host because the larval wasp waits for, it doesn't arrest the development of the host, it lets it continue to mature. At the other end of this parasitoid spectrum are wasps that border on being predators, and the mud dauber is a good example. They prey on spiders, or their hosts are spiders, and so the female stings the host into paralysis, arrests its development permanently if it's an immature spider, carts it back to a nest where she stuffs it in a cell, a mud cell, along with many other hosts. So she's caching all these hosts within a nest, and that's another, that's called It's not progression. It's it's uh, it's just she's caching the host within uh, another location rather than letting them continue their development. And wasps also, of course, are prey for other organisms, birds, tanagers in particular, like the western tanager on the left, will catch wasps and either tear the stinger out if it's a stinging wasp, or beat it into submission and then swallow it. Lizards like the spiny lizard there from Arizona doesn't care one whit, chows down on the wasp whether it can sting or not. And then there are other arthropods that feed on wasps as well. It's a hazardous quarry to go after, but things like crab spiders will wait on flowers to ambush a unwary pollinator or flower visitor. And ambush bugs the same way. They sit in wait and they can dispatch insects much larger than themselves because they inject a paralytic venom that takes effect immediately. And then they inject digestive enzymes and withdraw the contents of their victim. Robber flies behave much the same way. They typically perch on a twig or on the ground and watch for insects flying overhead, at which point they go out, accost the victim, and return to a perch to dine on it, much the same way the ambush bug tackles its victims. Well, wasps also have an important place in human science, human endeavors like science and invention. The wasp on the left there is a bee wolf, and as the name implies, the female wasp hunts solitary bees as food for her larval offspring, which she takes into a burrow underground. Between hunting expeditions, she covers that burrow entrance. And the naturalist Nico Tinbergen in Europe in the 1970s studied the European bee wolf, which actually hunts honeybees but behaves in much the same way. It lives in an underground nest that she covers between hunting forays. And Tinbergen was curious how the wasp could find her nest again, given that it's been covered over. And he discerned that his experiments showed that the wasp used subtle landmarks to determine where her nest was. And for his research, he shared the 1973 Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology with Konrad Lorenz and Karl von Frisch. And interestingly, von Frisch's studies were on honeybees, the very insects that the bee wolf was attacking. But anyway, they all three shared that Nobel Prize and founded together the study of animal behavior, which we know today as ethology. Now, whether or not paper wasps, like the one on the right there, are responsible for how we developed the invention of paper is up for debate, because we know that initially in Asia, paper was made from linen, from cotton, from other kinds of plant fibers that were harvested for that purpose. But a shortage of those materials in the late 1600s prompted a French naturalist, Réaumur. I'm probably mangling that pronunciation for those of you who speak French, but in 1719, he did observe paper wasps getting wood fibers and turning those into paper. And so he suggested wood fibers as an alternative to these, the short supply of linen and cotton and other materials that had been used up until that point. So paper wasps are responsible by proxy for our invention of the modern paper making process. So what is a wasp anyway? We've already been talking about it, but we haven't really defined what it means to be a wasp. They all belong to the order Hymenoptera, along with ants and bees. and also with sawflies and horntails in their kin. Up until recently, the sawflies and horntails were pretty much considered wasps, but there are some ways that they're very different from wasps, or what we consider wasps anyway. And for one, their larvae are herbivores, so they feed on plant material or bore in wood in the case of horntails. Their abdomens don't have a wasp waist. The abdomen is broadly attached to the thorax, like in many other insects that we're familiar with. So I've taken to calling those proto-wasps because wasps definitely descended from sawfly-like ancestors. But what we call wasps today are defined mostly by having a constricted wasp waist, where the perceived abdomen is obviously separate from the thorax and the head of the insect. Sometimes it's on a stalk or a petiole, but at the very least, it's constricted there. Well, ants and bees both have those wasp waists also. It might not always look like it, but they do have a constricted wasp waist. And so increasingly, ants and bees are being considered as wasps themselves, albeit ants being mostly wingless and bees being pollen collectors as opposed to being parasitoids. Now, there are some wasps that do not look like wasps. In many cases, the female and sometimes the male are wingless. And the velvet ants are the most common example of this. And you can see them running around on open ground, even where you are. They're most abundant in arid regions, but they're found throughout North America, throughout the world, for that matter. And so if you see a bright and relatively large ant crawling around, be warned that it's a female wasp and she packs a really powerful sting. But there are other wasp species whereby the females are also wingless, and it transcends most wasp families have at least one representative that expresses a wingless form. So how else do you identify a wasp other than the wasp waist, and how do you tell different wasps apart from each other? One clue can be the host or the prey. Most wasps are pretty specific into what kinds of other insects they're parasitoids of. And for example, thread-waisted wasps go after caterpillars mostly. And so if you see a very skinny wasp hauling around a caterpillar, you can be pretty certain, okay, that's a thread-waisted wasp. Then there are some of the tinier wasps, like the one we have on the right here. Now she can get several eggs into one caterpillar there. And she is instead of hauling the caterpillars to a nest, she is using the caterpillar in situ and injecting an egg into it, or several, and her larvae will consume the caterpillar from the inside out. The social wasps are true predators. They, like the paper wasp on the left there, will tackle prey, kill it, chew it up into a pulp, and take it back to the nest where she feeds the larvae in the nest immediately. So there's no reason to go through the process of paralyzing the prey for later consumption. The wasp larva is going to eat it immediately. But not true for the solitary wasps that cache their prey in quantity. These wasps catch the prey, paralyze it, arrest the development of the host, and then put it into a nest, and it serves as food for their larval offspring. But they're usually very particular, again, about what those hosts are. In the middle photo, by the way, was taken in your yard, Dave. I was watching this thing. It's a leaf rolling caterpillar, and I watched this thing force the caterpillar to eject from its rolled leaf, and it grabbed it in midair before the caterpillar could, bungee jump away, and it paralyzed it and eventually flew off with it. Well, some of the tinier wasps obviously will go after tinier victims, and aphids included. This is probably a joy to learn if you don't know this already. So there's these braconid wasps that are very tiny, and the female will insert one egg per aphid. And in the center photo, we have a couple of very healthy aphids at the top of the photo. But then we have this big bloated aphid at the bottom, and that is called an aphid mummy. And it's the victim of one of these tiny braconid wasps. The larval braconid wasp has hollowed out this aphid now, and it's just a bloated husk. And eventually the adult wasp will emerge by cutting a perfectly circular hatch in the back of the aphid and pop out and go start the cycle all over again. In other cases, as I mentioned previously, some of these tiny wasps actually lay their eggs in the eggs of other insects. They're so tiny that the egg of one other insect can be all the sustenance needed to produce another wasp. Well, I'll mention galls again because they can take many different forms. And if you've ever had Charlie Eisman speak to you, excuse me, he's no doubt talked to you about galls and the many forms they take and the different wasps that make them and the different parasitoid wasps that prey on the gall wasp larvae inside the galls as well. So knowing the host species for the gall and looking at the form that the gall takes, you can often identify two species, or at least a genus, the kind of wasp making it. Many of the solitary wasps build nests. Well, some of the social ones do too, of course. And so, you can often tell what kind of wasp you have by looking at the architecture of the nest. But you can't always go by that because sometimes wasps will reuse the nests of other wasps. Here we have a mason wasp that has just finished refurbishing the abandoned nest of a mud dauber. And so instead of spiders inside, she's put paralyzed caterpillars. And the blue mud dauber, which by the way, here she is with a black widow. They're one of the few wasps that go after black widows. She'll reuse old nests of the black and yellow mud dauber like the mason wasp has done there. And then lastly, here we've got leafcutter bees that have used abandoned mud dauber nests. And you can tell that because there's pieces of cut leaves sealing the cell chambers there instead of mud. Well, there's other signs of wasps too, in the absence of the wasp that can give you a clue. So here we have on the left, we have the cocoon of a braconid wasp that is a parasitoid of lady beetles. And it gets really weird because the lady beetle is still alive. So the wasp larva has completed its development, exited the lady beetle, spun a cocoon beneath it, and now the lady beetle is an unwilling guardian for that cocoon. So what happened was that the wasp larva's mother, when she laid her egg, also injected a specific virus into that lady beetle that took control of its nervous system, including its brain, and hijacked all its behaviors for the benefit of this wasp. And so if the lady beetle managed, or if the wasp larva managed to avoid some of the vital organs of the lady beetle, once this whole drama is concluded, the lady beetle could survive. It won't be able to reproduce, but it might survive the whole ordeal. The picture in the center I thought was just a piece of grass seed caught in a spider web, but no, it's actually the cocoon of a ichneummonid wasp that had been a parasitoid of the spider that lived in the web. And once it dispatched the spider, it made its way into the web, suspended itself, and spun that cocoon. And then on the far right, we have the remains of a caterpillar that has not been blasted with a shotgun, although it looks that way. Those holes were left by the exiting larvae of another kind of braconid wasp. Well, here we get into something where we need your participation. Now, because wasps can sting and they're very successful parasitoids of other insects, a lot of other insects want to be like them. They want to look like wasps because wasps can sting and defend themselves very well. And so if you're not a wasp, it pays to kind of look like one, right? So on the left, we have an actual yellow jacket, but the other two insects are not wasps. The one in the center is a kind of flower fly. And it might appear obvious, but I've been fooled a number of times by flies that look so much like wasps. Flies have only one pair of wings. Wasps have two, but that's difficult to see in the field. Flies generally have huge eyes, but in this case, the eyes of the fly are striped, so you can't tell where the eye ends and the rest of its face begins. Okay, well, the flies have really short antennae, and wasps have long antennae, as you can see on the yellow jacket there. But in this case, the fly is going to use its front legs and wave them out there like their antennae. So besides looking like a wasp, it also behaves like one. The insect on the far right is the locust borer. It's a kind of longhorned beetle that hangs out on goldenrod a lot. You probably saw them in the fall on goldenrod, and because they have that bold black and yellow pattern, a lot of potential predators leave them alone. Well, let's now test your expertise in discerning whether a given insect is a wasp or not. I'm going to give you two or more choices, and you have to tell me, is one a wasp and one not a wasp? And if so, which one? Are they both wasps? Or are neither one of them a wasp? And maybe, Dave, you can take folks off mute if that's possible, and they can volunteer their guesses.
If they raise their hand, I got a person here allowed to talk. Ann was the first one.
Hi, Ann.
Ann,
Hi, Eric. I'd say the first one's a wasp and the second one is not a wasp.
So you're saying the one on the left is, and the one on the right is not?
The one on, yes, my left is, and the one on the right is not.
Okay. Do we have anybody who wants to disagree with that?
Sue Cludia? Sue?
You're on mute, Sue.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Thank you. The one on the leaf is a wasp, and the one on the narrow-leaved plant is a moth.
Oh, wow. Okay, you think so? All right.
I think.
Well,
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's find out. You're right. Absolutely right. But I can tell you that when I saw this moth flying,
Yeah.
I was certain it was a wasp. There again, it's not just appearance, but it's appearance reinforced by behavior. And in this case, yes, it's a clear wing moth, which is a kind of moth. It's a day flyer, and so yeah, that enhances their mimicry. And then they go the extra mile by having either clear wings, or in this case, orange colored wings that mimic those warning colors of the spider wasp.
Great
Okay.
pictures.
Oh, thank you. All right, next example.
Oh, no. Excuse me. All right, who's got their hand up? That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
All right, David? Can you unmute? Oh, that was Sue. Where's
Yeah, here we go.
Hi, Eric and David. I believe the insect on the left might be a mantis, so not a wasp. And I think the one on the right is a wasp.
Okay.
All right.
Anybody
else?
else chiming in, or do we think we have it?
Yeah, that's it, I think. Okay,
Okay. All right, let's see.
demented fly.
Yeah, it is. It is very, very good, David. Yeah. They're not, I'm trying to figure out if manted flies are just not that common, or if they're so good at mimicking paper wasps, I've overlooked them. But I finally found some when I was living in Colorado, Colorado Springs, and I found that if I found one, I often found several. So they seem to be locally, what you would call locally abundant. And in the case of this one, it's a really good mimic of our Western paper wasp, their Miscasiderus, with a kind of petiolate abdomen. But mantispids are really bizarre because they're predators of spider egg cases. And so the female mantispid lays a whole bunch of eggs on vegetation, and then her larvae crawl off looking for a spider. And if they get on a male spider by accident, then they have to transfer to a female during copulation. And then when she's ready to spin her egg sac, then they go in to the egg sac and will gorge on the spider eggs there. So really weird lifestyle for that thing. Okay, let's try one more here. So I've got a triptych for you, it looks like. This may not be so easy.
Okay, Maria. Aliberti.
Hey there, my hand was up for the last one, but you
Oh.
want me to give it a try?
Sure.
Good.
All right. None of those looks like a fly. None of them looks like a fly. I say they're all Hymenoptera, so they're all the order of insects for you know, wasps and bees. Are they bees?
Well, you have to wait for the answer to that, but that's a really excellent observation. They are all in the order Hymenoptera. That's an excellent. You're the first person that's ever mentioned that, and that's very perceptive.
David, you want to give a shot at this? I think you're still.
Oh. I believe the bird, I believe the insects on the goldenrod is not a wasp.
Okay.
Neither is the center one, but I think the insect on the right is a wasp.
Okay.
All right.
Anyone else who wants to venture a guess before we reveal?
I don't see any more hands at the moment.
Okay.
All right.
There we go. So depending on your definition of wasp, two of them are, but the sawfly kind of constitutes one of those proto wasps, right? That has a you know, that's a primitive version. That's although interestingly, as adults, some of the sawflies are predatory, including this one shown here. And I will give people a pass on the center wasp because of the angle at which the photo was taken. Some wasps do have really big eyes, and this is one of them. And because of the way it's holding its antenna, it looks like it has short antennae, but in fact, the yellow between the eyes are the first segment of each antenna there. And not all bees are hairy, and we tend to think of that though when we're thinking of bees as a way to eliminate them from being confused with wasps, but especially the cuckoo bees, because they don't harvest their own pollen, but are in fact infiltrating the nests of their host bees. They don't have pollen baskets to give them away either. So good exercise, folks. It shows that it's not always that easy to tell them apart, and some of our distinctions might be a little bit artificial anyway. So okay, well, let's talk about observing wasps and what that looks like. And the tools for it are pretty simple. A lot of what you use for birding applies also to watching wasps and other insects. If you have a pair of close focusing binoculars, that helps. So if you can focus on something, 8 to 10 feet away from you, that's perfect. And I think a couple of you actually may not be muted any longer. And having a magnifier is handy as well if you want to get up close and personal. And remember, not all wasps sting, so many of them are safe to approach that way. Maybe you want a camera to take pictures, or these days, a cell phone probably takes better pictures than my camera does. A field guide may or may not be helpful, as the previous exercise demonstrated. And having a notebook to keep notes about where you went, when you went, weather, habitat, that kind of information is always helpful in making observations. Remember to use the right tool for the job. Here we have a pair of gentlemen observing a hornet nest from a safe distance. Okay, fine, they're birders, but I couldn't resist this. Anyway, I got right up in the grill of this queen bald-faced hornet because she was the only one occupying the nest, and I have learned to read the body language of some of these social wasps to know when I'm too close and when I'm not. So if you're watching paper wasps and they're standing on tiptoe with their wings flared, that means you're too close. So yeah, it helps to keep your distance in some cases. Also, for those of you that like to do moth lighting, you're likely to find some wasps at your lights as well. Many of them are going to be very tiny, and you have to, you kind of squint to see some of them. But some of the ichneumon wasps are pretty sizable, and so the nocturnal ones are typically this orange color or brick color with big black eyes, and they're nocturnal because their caterpillar hosts are feeding at night, and so they're out looking for caterpillar hosts and being distracted by your black light. Among the interesting behaviors you can observe wasps doing are sleeping. And so many wasps pass the night or periods of inclement weather by going rather dormant or inactive at least. And they typically adopt some kind of strange posture when they do this. And they'll grab a twig or a leaf in their jaws and then curl their bodies around it, as these wasps are demonstrating here. And these are all solitary wasps. Male wasps seem to do this behavior more often than female wasps, by the way. The females may be in burrows or some other place instead. The thread-waisted wasps adopt this really peculiar posture and often will do this behavior when they're sleeping in groups and loose clusters. And I've seen situations where a number of them were gathered on a particular dead weed, and it looked like either flowers or seed pods drooping from them, but in fact it was a number of these thread-waisted wasps that were bedding down for the night. Easily observable behavior. Again, some of these were taken in Massachusetts even. So go around the edges of your yard or a field at dusk, and you'll see them starting to settle in. Some male wasps, even though they're solitary, will gather in large groups to pass the night. And the blue mud dauber is one of these. Never fails to cause consternation because they often choose under the eaves of a house or a door jamb, in this case of an outbuilding. And if you don't know they're all males, it can be kind of perturbing. And then you have flower wasps there on the right. Again, these are all males, but they have the same bold, bright and black and yellow color pattern. Plus, part of their genitalia is formed into a pseudo sting. And so they have this wicked hook-like thing coming out of their rear that is very intimidating if you don't know that it's harmless. Another great behavior to watch wasps doing is grooming. And I like this because it's one of the few times that a wasp actually sits still, allowing me to get pictures of it. But in the course of their gyrations and cleaning and what have you, they often expose parts of their bodies that are normally concealed by either their wings or some other body part. And so you get a chance to observe more of the insect than when it's not grooming, or certainly when it's flying. Insects, or wasps being insects, are cold-blooded and they need to warm up. And many wasps do this by basking, either simply sprawling over a log or a rock, or turning their body, the side of their body to the sun, so they're kind of tipped over and exposing the greatest body surface to the sun to get heated up. Wasps need to drink water, especially those that use either wood fibers or mud to construct their nests. And so consequently, you often see mud daubers, yellow jackets, paper wasps, mason wasps around the edges of puddles or pools or streams or ponds, or sometimes they actually land on the pond and drink directly before lifting off again. And of course, feeding. Wasps must feed their offspring protein, and that usually takes the form of another insect host, or flower pollen is rich in protein as well. But we learned only the pollen wasps harvest that resource. But the adult wasp needs carbohydrates, and so it favors things like flower nectar. And if you're planting for wasps, my observations indicate that they prefer white or yellow flowers, and frequently either composites, where it's a one-stop shopping. They go to each individual flower on a composite to get nectar, or an umbel, again, same kind of thing, but a flat-topped flower, or a raceme. And I think it's both that they like being able to get a lot of nectar without expending a lot of energy flying from one flower to the next. But I also think it's because they like to see what's going on around them. Few wasps will plunge down a tubular flower like a bee would do, or in some butterflies will do that. Wasps like to know what's happening around them. Wasps also visit extrafloral nectaries. Peonies are a good example of this, by the way, even though that's not a native plant. When just before it blossoms, it's exuding sweet stuff that bees and wasps and flies and ants will go to and lick off. But this is also true of sunflowers. Catalpa leaves, the base of the catalpa leaves have extrafloral nectaries, and so wasps will visit this to get carbohydrates in that fashion as well. Here's some more examples of wasps visiting extrafloral nectaries. And sometimes the seed pods, like in the far right picture, we have a wasp visiting the seed pod of a yucca. And I'm not sure if she's getting something that the pod is exuding, or if there's aphid honeydew on there, because certainly aphids infest yuccas a lot. Wasps also feed on oozing and fermenting sap from wounds on trees or plants in general, actually. And so, yeah, they like their alcoholic beverages just as much as we do. And an overlooked source of refreshment and energy for wasps and bees and other insects is honeydew secreted by aphids and scale insects. Aphids and their kin feed on plant sap, but it takes an awful lot of plant sap to get any nutrients out of it. So they're constantly shedding sugary wastes, and it rains down on leaves and conifer needles, and wasps and bees and other insects fly in and lap that up like you would not believe. And honeydew is especially important in late autumn and early spring when aphids are active, but there's not a lot of things blooming. So maybe resist your impulse to off your aphid colonies a little bit, because they can be a source of nutrients for other insects until other sources of nutrients come into play. The aphids themselves, of course, can be food for a number of other insects, including little aphid wasps, and they nest in pre-existing cavities like hollow twigs, and so they'll grab an aphid, sting it into paralysis, cart it back to the nest, and stuff it in there with a bunch of other aphids as food for their larval offspring. The ichneumon wasp, diplazon, is a different animal entirely. Instead of laying eggs in the aphids, which looks like what she's doing, she has found the larvae of syrphid flies that are feeding on the aphids. And so her larval offspring will feed as an internal parasite on those syrphid fly larvae as they munch on the aphids. I think there's scarcely any insect that does not have at least one wasp being a parasitoid of it. Wasps also will feed on gall secretions. Again, this is kind of almost an extrafloral nectary kind of thing happening. And it happens more, I've noticed, in the Western US than elsewhere, but it's worth taking a peek at galls and seeing if they're exuding anything that might attract other insects. Another fabulous behavior to observe wasps doing is nesting, especially the ones that nest in the ground. And I've come to divide them into two categories, one being what I call kickers. And these would be the sand wasps. And they move an enormous amount of sand thanks to what they call tarsal rakes, these spines that are coming out of what we would call their forearms. And they just kind of do this and churn out vast quantities of sand behind them that go right between their legs and pile up as they're digging their shallow, almost horizontal burrows in sandy situations. But other wasps have a different way of nesting, and I call these carriers. And so these are typically what the thread-waisted wasps do. They nest more vertically. And so what she's doing is biting off grains of sand or soil, forming a little wad of it. And then she flies off, disperses it, comes back to the nest, and does the same thing again. And by dispersing the sand that she's digging out, she doesn't give any indication where her nest is. So it makes it a lot harder for her enemies to locate her nest. And we'll talk about her enemies in a minute. And here they are. There are, while some wasps are parasitoids of flies, the reverse is also true. There are some flies that are parasitoids of wasps, namely satellite flies. And I took this photo on the left in South Deerfield, in fact. So we have a thread-waisted wasp excavating her burrow, and this fly is orbiting her activities, waiting for a chance to lay a larva, not an egg, a larva at the lip of that nest. The larva will crawl into the nest and become a parasitoid of the wasp larva, or consume the insects that she is provisioning the nest with. Bee flies do the same kind of thing. In this case, the bee fly is hovering at the entrance of the wasp nest and will eventually try and lob an egg or fire an egg down that burrow. And the same deal, her larva will be a parasitoid of the wasp larva and the caterpillars, in this case, that this wasp is provisioning with. Another thing that wasps are good at, besides hunting, is mating. That's true for most insects, actually, right? Reproduction is the thing they do best, arguably. And so you'll often find wasps paired up. And invariably, the one on top is going to be the male. And in this case, I don't think either one is engaged. Maybe the couple on the left is engaged. I better edit that the next time I give this talk. and then the couple on the right is not. He's doing his best to excite her and get accepted by her to make further advances. And the thread-waisted wasps, like the Aramnophila on the left, can go about activities they would normally do separately while they're in tandem. It's amazing. They fly together perfectly. She can go about, getting nectar while he's otherwise occupied. And so she might groom while he's on her back like this. Yeah, while they're paired, wasps are hardly hindered by being together. Sometimes mating is complicated. The male shield-handed wasps have this shield-like flange on the front leg that they will use to cover the eyes of the female. And it's thought that it's filtering light so that she recognizes he is a member of her own species. But there's other theories that say, no, there's a pheromone component that is being shed by these shields. So there's a lot we don't know about wasp behavior. And this is one case where that's very true. But hey, the female usually has the final say, and she will go through all kinds of gyrations to avoid the male's attempt to copulate with her. She'll move her abdomen underneath her or to the side, or it's often like she's parrying with him if she's trying to avoid his advances. Eventually, he'll get the message. Well, males engage in other kinds of behaviors too, besides just mating. There's often a prelude to that. Some wasps scent mark, like the weevil wasp on the right, is applying a pheromone to both repel competing males and to let females know that this is his territory as well. And other wasps, like the stink bug hunter on the right, he has enormous eyes that wrap all the way around the top of his head. The better to see females passing over or rival males that he will give chase to. And I think these must be the fastest flying insects I have ever seen. It's like 1 second they're there and the next nanosecond they're not. But he'll return to this perch from which he'll defend his territory until he's successful, or he'll be ousted by a competing male, one of the two. Cicada killers also exhibit this same kind of behavior. And so the males, I should say, and so they'll perch in an area where they're either likely to see females or where females are nesting, and will chase off all intruders, including people. And so they behave quite aggressively, though, of course, we know that male wasps can't sting. So it's all bluff when it comes to anything larger than they are in any event. But those are the wasps that people see when they see the cicada killers. And so they think, oh, they're going to sting me. They're all aggressive. Well, no, that's the male. And he's defending a territory. The females are way too busy either feeding on, in this case, some fermenting sap, or they're busy hunting cicadas and nesting. They're not going to bother you. And they're so large, you should be able to avoid them easily anyway, right? Well, once you've been observing wasps, we hope that you'll share your work on some kind of citizen science platform. I use iNaturalist most frequently these days, but Project NOAA is very similar. And Bug Guide is arguably the best resource for learning about insects in North America, north of Mexico, plus spiders and non-marine crustaceans and other arthropods as well. Fabulous resource that you can add to. Dave can tell you all about all of these, I'm sure. And most of you probably already use them. So how can we help wasps? If you want to go the extra mile beyond observing them, what kinds of things can you do? Well, One is to just be weed tolerant is how I frame it. We have a lot of native wildflowers volunteering themselves in our yard. And we find that if, hey, if it's growing there already, yeah, let's encourage it. If it's not something that's a state or federally listed noxious weed, which should go, everything else is pretty much welcome. And unless it, takes over, but we haven't had that problem yet. So yeah, things like goldenrod and buckwheats and what have you, great attractants for all kinds of insects, from butterflies to bees to wasps. Maybe you want to landscape your whole yard or garden with native plants or with flowers to attract pollinating insects. Certainly nothing is stopping you from that. Hopefully you have sensible weed ordinances there that allow you to plant with native plants instead of exotic cultivars. You could also provide wasps and bees with housing. These are typically called bee blocks or bee condos. They can take the form of a bundle of hollow twigs, like the center photo shows, or a block of wood or log in which you've drilled holes of varying diameters to a depth of at least 3 inches. And these will be readily used by different kinds of bees and wasps. Here in Colorado, we had a couple of different mason wasp species utilize our bee blocks. And here in Kansas, we got these guys nesting. This was a pleasant surprise. These are called keyhole wasps. And the male, interestingly, they will work in pairs. This is pretty unusual for wasps. So the male defends and holds down the fort, so to speak, while the female is out hunting and doing the heavy lifting. And this actually hits a little too close to home for my wife's relationship with me, but really good. Okay, so yeah, keyhole wasps. Another unique wasp that you might find nesting in your bee block or the track of your sliding glass door or window are these things called grass carriers. And so, again, these are solitary wasps. The females are parasitoids of small katydids and tree crickets. And they stick them into pre-existing cavities that they line with cut pieces of grass. They don't do what you would think and harvest pieces of loose grass just floating around. They actually cut them, as the wasp in the bottom right photo is doing. And you can tell when her nest is done because it looks like somebody stuck a broom in her nesting chamber there. And that's how you can tell she's completed that. But yeah, they sometimes take up residence in window tracks, and people wonder why there's a bunch of grass and grubs and worms and things, and that's just the nest of one of these grass carrier wasps. Well, if you have things using your bee block or bee condo, you'll also have parasitoids of those occupants of your bee block. And so here we have leucospidid, which is one of the larger chalcidoid wasps. Most of the chalcidoids are very tiny. They're the micro wasps we were talking about earlier. And here we have a female drilling directly into a concealed cell of a host wasp, laying her egg in it. The wild carrot wasps or gastruptiids on the right there. She uses her long ovipositor to pierce the mud partitions in the cavities. Once the nests are sealed, she can drill right through that to reach the host wasp inside. So she's typically going over, as a parasitoid of mud daubers and mason wasps. Well, we did get bees using our bee block in both in here in Kansas and in Colorado. This is from Colorado. And so you see the leafcutter bee entering a hole in the photo on the right. And then there's these 2 wasps sitting there watching her. And what these wasps are doing is calculating the time that she is away from her nest. And when they've figured out what kind of an interval that is, the sapidgids will back into the nest tunnel and lay their own eggs inside the nest and get back out before the bee knows that anything has happened at all. Some people argue that having a bee block is just that. It's an invitation to parasitoids that are going to decimate pollinators, but I guarantee you the same thing happens in the wild. It's no different in terms of the degree of parasitism. It's not any greater in your bee block than it is elsewhere. And the last of the parasitoids that you might see around your bee block are the cuckoo wasps, and they are so beautiful. They're usually fairly small, but they're these bright metallic colors, and they don't sting. In fact, they are very heavily armored to protect themselves from the hosts that the host wasps that they are, whose nest they're infiltrating, and they can roll into a ball if they get, like an armadillo, if they get, if they need to defend themselves. Well, I want to end with this lovely quote from the late Howard Evans. He says, "I happen to like yellow jackets. Do I not have a right to yellow jackets if my neighbor has a right to a cat? If freedom means anything at all, it means the right to choose one's environment and one's friends." And I hope that that after this presentation, you would consider wasps as your friends, not foes. This is a graphic just recently done by my friend Sloan Tomlinson, whose photos you saw earlier. He's at That Wasp Guy on Instagram. I believe he has an Etsy as well, where you can get this as a sticker or as a t-shirt. So just a quick plug for him. And now my Amazon spiel. If you like wasps and or me, hey, you might also like Insectpedia, which is my newest book. Insects Did It First, which is the second version of this book that I am co-author with Gregory Paulson on, and the Kaufman Guide. And by the way, you can get, I forgot about this. I also did a pocket field guide to common bees and wasps of Ohio, which does double duty for Massachusetts, and you can get that as a free PDF. I'll give Dave the link to that website where you can get that for free, and he can pass that on in his email tomorrow. But I want to thank Dave again for the invitation, to my wife for tolerating me while I put these things together, to Unipress Books, who was the initial publisher of the Wasp book, and Princeton University Press for publishing it here in the US. If you use the discount code ERE30, by the way, and you order from the publisher, you'll get a 30% discount. Again, Sloan Tomlinson for all the work he's doing. And my mentors, past, present, and future. I didn't learn what I shared with you all by myself. I had a lot of help. And thank you all for coming. And I'm going to mute myself while Dave comes back on.
All right, Eric, that was wonderful. We will have some time if people want to ask a couple questions in the Q&A, and I see a lot of people kind of liked your talk. Well, that's good. So does anybody have a question? I have a hand raised. Anthony, did that work? Anthony Costello, did you have a question? All right, no, I guess not. All right, well, I'm not seeing a lot of questions, a lot of kudos.
Okay. No one's going to ask me about murder hornets.
Oh, someone's asking about what parasitizes carpenter bees. Is there a wasp that parasitizes carpenter bees?
Good question. Probably not one that readily comes to mind. I mean, most insects do have a wasp parasitoid, but not carpenter bee is not one that comes to mind readily. They do have a parasitoid fly. The tiger bee fly is definitely a parasitoid of carpenter bee. So that may be, and they look a little waspish. So that might be what you're seeing if you're thinking that they might be a parasitoid. Yeah, they definitely are. But other wasps will utilize abandoned carpenter bee nests, though. So that could be another thing you're looking at. Some of the larger mason wasps will definitely use abandoned carpenter bee nests.
Okay. With that, I'm going to stop the recording just to